indigenous foodways as forms of what these thinkers would refer to as epistemicide, which is part and parcel of the project of genocide, the erasure of indigenous knowledge as such in ways that threaten that project of settler colonialism. And so, in a very real sense, from within that framework, the resumption of these traditional practices, in addition to the real significance that both Aaron and Gary are lifting up, that's a real threat to that ongoing settler colonial project. It disrupts the logics that it's trying to perpetuate, which I think we're going to get back to the question of land in a second, but it represents an alternate path to the ends that settler colonialism seeks.
Thank you, Garrett. And Paul, if there's anything else.
I don't really have anything to add. I did find one statement that was striking from the film itself, which is said, "We're not transforming food as much as food is transforming us." Mm-hmm. And I think that helps in that process of the intergenerational healing, right? That the recognition that food is so central to culture, both among Native peoples here in the United States, but around the world. It's just such a central part. And we need to recognize that it's different than other commodities that we have.
Thank you, Paul. I really found this question interesting, at least from my end, is because I think it really points to what the film talked about and how a lot of this violence has become cyclical, in the sense that you see that, for example, like recently for Accomplice, we tried to search how many indigenous and natives are studying in this campus, and there's like less than 100 people. And this is like insane. Like, it's insane to talk about, like, all of us are here talking about their problems, and a lot of them are not here aside from our speakers. And it's just that sort of lack of visibility just points to so much trauma. And I think that it's important to ask them about it. So
if I could add on to something there before you added on about you said something about like the university and stuff and that and there's like only 100 students there. We have a few Potawatomis that went there, but one thing I want to add is that for a lot of people that don't know this, and first, welcome to our area, our tribal lands and stuff. I didn't do that. Welcome you guys, but that like your lake out there and stuff, that was a sacred lake to us, and basically that land that you're sitting on is unceded land. The university has no title to it. They know that land's worth $3 billion. Part of their obligation to us was that they would provide free education to any Pokagon member that would meet the requirements to get in. That's all we ask. To this day, they have not ever lived up to that. They wanted to do bricks with us, and say honors on their wall of honor and stuff like that, but not do that. And so we could actually have more people at the university doing that, but they don't want to. They rewrote history, and we've had this discussion with them before, and but I don't hold nothing against it. You guys get a good education there and stuff, so it's okay. Sorry.
No, Gary, thank you so much. We appreciate it very much. I think it's important to talk about how this university has committed itself to has not done its part to reckon with history, and I know that this panel is like just the tip of it's not nothing compared to what we owe to the traditional owners of this land. So thank you so much, and thank you for allowing us to learn about this. So for the next question, it's, in what ways does reclaiming land increase food sovereignty for Native nations? I guess just to kind of like come back, maybe I want to start again with Gary, and then with Aaron, and then Paul and Garrett.
Okay.
So Gary?
Well, one thing that, like with federal recognition, we were able to require land that was taken from us, well, basically that we don't have no more, so we were able to repurchase it, and we put it in a trust. So one of the things that we have now is that we have like 1,000 acres of organic land to grow our crops and stuff in, and that's one of the projects that we did. Right now I think we own over 8,000 acres. We went from 1 acre left to over 8,000. And but no, that's one of the things is that working with the agriculture and stuff like that that's how we're doing it, And then one of the other things with the land is that we have and we don't have in our South Bend property, but we have growing areas in each one for the citizens in that, so they can go out and get fresh crops and stuff. Not crops, I mean, but get your salad and stuff. But we want to make that bigger, so that's what I have on that one. Hey, and plus our indigenous foods that we keep track of our plants and stuff that grows, because most people, they look at it's just a woods. No, that's a garden. That's a whole forest full of, it's a refrigerator. Go out and get what you want out of there. And so we keep track of that type of stuff. We utilize that, see what we're losing at a rapid rate, because of climate change and everything. Things are disappearing. We notice that. One of the big things, like with our land, I'm pushing for at the tribe, is that we had members that were taken out, like to Kansas and that, and that's where they live now. But they were from this area too. And one of the things is that they learned how to grow in a very harsh climate. We have a very Mediterranean climate around here, so it's totally different. So now they know something that we don't know. So I tell people, said maybe they went out there for a reason. They know how to grow in drought conditions, hot conditions, and that's what our future, they're telling us our future holds here. So I don't know if I got off track, but yeah, I just wanted to throw that one out there.
Thank you, Gary. Erin?
So before I give this one to Garrett and Paul, because I don't know much about this, I just remember the documentary stating that if you want to take out a whole culture, you take away their land and food source. And that's exactly what happened. And so I believe that by giving Native people back their land, or letting them reclaim their land, you're letting them reclaim the land to harvest. And so by having land to actually grow and not rely on the government to provide you food, you're allowing them to increase the food sovereignty in that way. But that is the limit of my knowledge for that question. So Garrett, that's all yours.
Great. I would reiterate just that I'm speaking as a settler. I'm not an indigenous person. But, thinking alongside a lot of the folks that I engage in my work, kind of tying this back to the previous answer, the question of settler colonialism, land is key, right? Because the knowledge is connected to the land. And there's a way, I think you can see a real trend right now. I'm not sure if the SPI folks, if you all are seeing this, there was a story on NPR last week, and I'm sorry to begin and I had to go like buy a tote bag for every time I started a story like this. But right, they're talking about the importance of indigenous agricultural practices for anticipating and mitigating the effects of climate change, right? Exactly to what Gary and Aaron have been speaking to. And so they're talking about the importance of things like, crop rotation, agroforestry, mixed and intercropping, polyculture, things that they look back and say, oh, these were indigenous practices that can help us deal with the effects of climate change and be more sustainable in our things. But through this whole story, there's no mention of the dispossession of indigenous land, right? And so it's this kind of vacuum in which we're discussing these practices that can help us, NPR listeners, whatever, deal with the effects of climate change. And it just abstracts that. And this just felt so on the nose, because last week the country spent time celebrating a story of indigenous food practices helping us, right, survive the first harsh winter of Plymouth. We saw when the Yurok folks were speaking to the young woman from the Mashpee Wampanoag. We have a story already about how we detach indigenous agricultural practices from the land in a way that distracts us or abstracts us from the dispossession that ensues, right? We tell that story of the first Thanksgiving in a way that hides all of the violence that came after and before. And I think that the land is key for thinking about this moving forward when we think about the restitution and restoration of indigenous foodways and what that means, on those local levels, but also in a broader systemic sense, because there are equally exploitative ways of doing that again in the 21st century, of trying to get in touch with these knowledges that abstract in similar ways from this kind of myth that was named in the film, whose hold is in some quarters at least starting to weaken. But just want to name that, and that I think land is so central to making sure we don't fall into that same trap again.
Thank you, Garrett.
Yeah, I mean, it seems a bit obvious that increasing land would be beneficial to improving food sovereignty, so it's straightforward. I would only add that one is that you should consider water as well. It's not just access to land, but the combination with water, especially I'm from Southern California, and water is extremely important for everyone that wants to produce agriculture. So it does matter what kind of land you're giving. And I would also add that there's evidence that this is actually successful, right? In Peru, there's a project with the Inter-American Development Bank and the Peruvian government where they handed the land in the Amazon region over to the indigenous people. And so they use GIS monitoring of that land. This is the selva, right? The Amazon forest, the jungle. And they found that it actually increased the management of the land, and it allowed the indigenous people there to make more money out of the situation. So they basically created these communal lands. So it was an expansion of land that hadn't existed before, and it's helping both save the Amazon and improve the livelihoods of the indigenous people. And I would guess if you were to try to replicate this around the world, you would find a similar pattern. So it not only makes sense from a justice point of view, it makes sense from a purely climate change and economic point of view.
Thank you, Paul. I think I think it's very interesting how Paul brought up in our this conversation also about how this sort of pattern of injustice is just repeated in other contexts as well. So I guess to just share, I come from the Philippines, where there's a lot of indigenous people too, and of course we were colonized by the Americans and Spanish, but we were also our people also have committed injustice towards our own indigenous people. And I think it's important that, as Gary and everybody has mentioned, that this sort of injustice is not only historical, it's a current sort of thing. And that's things we have to keep in mind all the time. It's not like we're talking history, this is people's lives right now. So I want that to be at the forefront. And I think it's important also that they brought up about Thanksgiving. For us who are non-American, it was very interesting to learn what Thanksgiving was, because as a non-American, you realize oh, you're celebrating that. Are you sure? But you guys should probably think about it. You can have turkey, but maybe change the idea. I have a last question for all of our speakers, because the last few, if we have time, I'll be giving them to the audience. So my last question for our speakers is, for our panel, is how does this film particularly intersect with your current work and advocacy? And maybe if you can put in how can we all take kind of steps to support indigenous ways of life and to kind of support what this film advocates for? I think right now there's just so much knowledge right there, and a lot of people are getting that sort of paralysis of just, okay, I'm just going to learn about this, but it's important for all of us to act. So yeah, so how does this intersect with your work, and what can we all do? So I'll start with Paul this time.
Sure. It's quite interesting for me, because as I said, I've worked around the world. I've been to, worked with governments in 40, 50 countries all over the world. And to be quite frank, when I was an undergraduate at the University of San Diego, I actually went to the Viejas Indian Reservation a few times, which I actually think Aaron might be associated with. And I also spent a lot of time going down to Tijuana working with Habitat for Humanity and a couple other groups. And in the end, I decided I wanted to take a development path, right, to work in lower income countries and to think about issues there. And I did that partly intentionally because I found the issues in the United States so depressing, because we had the money to do the things we should, and we just didn't. Where other countries quite often don't have the money they need, and I felt I could provide some support. But in some ways, these issues that I've been working around the world are around the corner, and it does make me think, how can we work more? How can I personally work more locally with these types of issues, and bring hopefully that expertise I've gained from various parts of the